Okay, so let's dive in. We're on the precipice of a very unusual High Holy Day season. And, we've never done this before. We've never experienced these kind of issues. And we are being pulled, I got to tell you, in many, many different directions. For instance, there are, with the idea of live streaming or Zooming over Shabbat and on Yantif, there are halachic issues. Technically, one really is not supposed to use electronics, it would be one thing if it was left on and we come in front of it and then leave, but it's clearly something that needs to be, somebody has to manage it and monitor it, so we're in trouble from that realm. But the alternative, of course, is what happens in most, if not all, Orthodox synagogues, where either you violate the state law, said we don't care what the governor says, it's Rosh Hashannah or it's Shabbos or it's a wedding, and we're coming together and God will protect us. Either go that way, or what a number of Orthodox communities are doing is you gather in small pods outside. As long as the weather holds, you can pull that off. I know where my son lives in Jerusalem, everybody clearly lives in apartment buildings, and there's in the courtyard, somebody will be holding a service. And people from their balconies are able to follow from where they are and constitute a minyan that way. So here we're being torn with what does Jewish law say? What does New York State law say? What does common sense and good hygiene and health tell us to do? And then we throw one other thing into the mix, which is the whole issue of the importance of community. You know, for people who are Shabbos regulars, they deeply miss the camaraderie, being with their friends, being with the people that they spend every weekend with in the synagogue. And so that's been very difficult for these 6+ months. But even for people who aren't regulars, you've got the whole issue of it's Yantif, it's Rosh Hashannah, it's Yom Kippur, it's Yizkor. You know, how are we going to possibly miss that? And so people who even aren't that religious, you know, are devastated that they can't be in synagogue. We asked people, we have a capacity, we're allowing 100 people to join us in a sanctuary and social hall that usually holds 700 and more people. And it's interesting that, Rosh Hashanah, maybe there were 20 people who said, I would like to come. For Yom Kippur, so far we've got 60+ people. So it's clear that there's a very strong emotional tie, even for people who aren't that religious. So we're trying to juggle all of these things, Jewish law, what's prudent and appropriate from a health point of view, and the desperate need of Jews to come together, certainly on these holidays. So different people in different places have made different decisions, and Orthodox basically say, sorry, we're not going to Zoom or live stream, and we're, unless you're in the Hasidic community, most Orthodox are not going to to violate the laws. So they're just going to daven at home or outside in small groups. And other people say what we're really concerned about, fearing the idea of bringing people together. God forbid, one person is sick and then it spreads, a super spreader. What are we going to do? So there are a number of shuls that have said no services and we're only live streaming or we're only Zooming. And we've sort of tried to come down in the middle to say, for those people who really want to be here, we will do it in the best way that we can. From what I see here, looking out, we've got a plexiglass separation between us on the bima and the congregation, between the rabbi and the cantor. So we've got that. And then we've really separated the spaces so that every seat is basically at least 6 feet apart. And again, you can only seat 100 people right now in our sanctuary, the way it is. There's tape on the floor, and we've got books, for people that will not be reused the next day. They'll be put aside until the next week. We're doing whatever we can to try to do this in a smart way, and yet we're still scared. We desperately want to be here for people who need this. We desperately want to keep people healthy. And forget about us, even people in the government and even doctors aren't really sure exactly what is right, and we're all winging it. So we're doing the best we can. Having said that, let me dive in and give you some help maybe in working your way through a service if you're not going to be with us in the temple. So let me start by saying the following. Number one, get a book. You got to have a machzor. You can still show up tomorrow or even Friday. Just give us a call, let us know when you can come, and you can pick up a machzor. Is it possible to sit at home and just watch? It is. But if you truly want to get into what's happening, you need to see the text, be it Hebrew, be it English, in our wonderful machzor, Lev Shalem, to see the commentaries, the additional readings. That's very important. So we've got books, we're willing to loan them out, and you still have got 2 days to come and to pick one up. So that's the very first thing I would suggest. Number two is, this may be silly or difficult, but I really believe it. You've got to create a sacred space. What do I mean by that? That if you're at home and you're at your kitchen table, right, or if you're some place that's just an ordinary place, it's going to be hard to focus on the computer for the 3 hours or whatever it is that the service takes, or however long you're going to be at that service. So what are you supposed to do? If you can, I would urge you to try to create a sacred space. What do I mean by that? How do you do that? In other words, wherever you're able to set up your computer, right, if that could be separate from things that are too distracting around you, that, it seems to me, would be a good idea. Having your tallis and using that is something that is a kind of a reminder that you're at a service and not just watching TV or something else on YouTube. So if you can, it may sound silly, but if you could put around you, if you have Jewish ritual objects that sort of make that place for that time into a sacred space, I think it's going to help in terms of the venue and the ambiance. Number 3, I would urge you to dress up and not dress down. Now, you don't need to wear a suit and a tie, but I would also say showing up in your pajamas or in sweats, again, that determines, how we dress determines how we feel about something. So dressing so that you're not in your pajamas is a way of saying, I'm doing something very serious, and that's a little bit more important than being comfortable. Like, you can work at home, perhaps, in sweats, but if we're standing before God, and life and death are on the line, being in your pajamas is not necessarily the way to go. In addition, I would urge you to try to create sacred time. Now, sacred space, I've spoken about, but sacred time is that from 9 to 12, or for whatever amount of time that you're going to be with us over the computer, it's critical that you be focused, that you not be distracted. Part of that is where you are and what else is at hand and what's around you. But part of it is a mental thing. Just like when we recite the Shema, the tradition is you cover your eyes. And the reason is that in a 2, 3, 4 hour service, it's easy to be distracted. But for the single most important line of the Siddur, Shema Yisrael, no distractions. I'm not going to look at anything. I'm covering my eyes. I want to focus on just that. Now, that's not too difficult if we're talking about something that takes 30 seconds. Something that may take as long as 3 hours is hard. But again, if you can focus and create a sacred time from 9 to 12, or from 10 to whatever time you're going to devote, if you could come in with the mindset of, this is where I am, that this is all that I'm going to be doing. I am totally there, right? In meditation, to be there, to be into it, and nothing else, so that we're not reading the paper, drinking a cup of coffee, watching the TV, doing 3 or 4 things at the same time. That doesn't work for the Yamim Noraim, which is the Hebrew for the days of awe, in which we are really trying to concentrate on what the meaning of the day is all about. Now I need to just help you understand the notion of abbreviated service. Usually our regular Rosh Hashannah service starts at 8 and goes till 1:30, something like that. So we're talking about a 5.5 hour service. And we don't even do, every single prayer in the service. So by us, it's about 5+ hours. We understand that if people are at home, and if people are on their own, and if people are in front of a computer, that there's no way that you're going to be able to be focused totally for 5+ hours. On the other hand, right, one of the, back in April and in May, when we were considering all the possibilities, we said, wouldn't it be interesting if maybe the second day of Rosh Hashannah, maybe if we did an outdoor service, and maybe it was 45 minutes, And then we brought in another group and did the same thing again. But, on paper, a lovely idea, very wonderful change from, being in the sanctuary and going on 3-4 hours. But again, what are you able to do in 45 minutes? And again, we're trying to weigh all the different things that are pulling us in different directions. The logistical needs on the one hand, and on the other hand, the whole notion of, is that a real service? And are we being respectful to Jewish tradition? And there's never a good answer. There's always, something that's going to get lost. So we knew that we needed to basically be able to, we had to abbreviate the service. And we figured for all that there is on Rosh Hashannah, that we probably needed 3 hours. Now look, people often sit for 3 hours for a bar bat mitzvah. So it was certainly something that was possible that people could do. The question is, how do we go about knocking 2 hours out of the service? So, and it's painful and it's difficult, but here's what we came up with. And it's important that you understand the process. First of all, one of the easiest things from a halachic point of view, but maybe not from an emotional point of view, is the piyutim. You should know that one of the things that makes Rosh Hashanah different than Shabbos, one of the reasons you need your own book, a Musaf, instead of the regular Siddur, is that there are many, many prayers in the Musaf that aren't in the Siddur. And many of them fall into the category of what we call piyutim. Piyut, probably from the same root as poet, right? Piyutim, a piyut is a Jewish liturgical poem. And some of them go back to the 5th century, and they are written all the way through the Middle Ages. And over the course of the generations, many of these had been added, written by great poets or cantors or rabbis, and often they are incredibly erudite, meaning that in order to understand it, you have to be a whiz in Hebrew at the highest literary levels. Number 2, you have to be familiar with all of the Bible and all of the Talmud. There's not a lot of people that fit into that category. I got to tell you, I confess, that even when I read some of these piyutim, I am lost, right? The Hebrew is not modern spoken Hebrew. It's not even rabbinic Hebrew. It's a medieval Hebrew. And that some of the references and the allusions are beyond a top-notch scholar. So there's always, each generation would write one, and a synagogue or a community would say, our rabbi or our poet just wrote a poem. That's got to be in our book. So they put it in the book. And then pretty soon, in another community, they said, how can we take it out? It's in the book. Once something's in the book, it's holy, it's sacred. You can't take something out of the book. So each generation, the book becomes bigger and bigger, and the service becomes longer and longer. And there are many, many piyutim that we find. A lot of them have the wonderful tunes that cantors and choirs have been singing and that we're all used to and we look forward to. But I got to tell you, there's always been a debate in Jewish law as to some people felt, I love that song, I love that poem, right? And it's beautiful, it's a beautiful addition. Other people say, what it does, it doesn't belong technically in the service. And by putting it in the service, you're distracting us from the key things that need to be in the service. So over the course of time, most rabbis have said, you shouldn't do these piyutim. The Jewish community said, how can we get rid of this poem, or we love the song, so it stayed. So as we tried to chisel 2 hours out of our service for people at home, one of the first things to go was many of these piyutim, which besides the tune, which some people love and some people don't, most people don't pay much attention to the words. And so we've eliminated a lot of them. And then you have another category where you've got a whole paragraph that leads up to a blessing. It's really the blessing that's the key. And it's the paragraph that leads up to the blessing that sets the tone and develops the theme. But it's that really blessing that's the halachic, the legal Jewish requirement. And so one of the things that we've eliminated are a number of those paragraphs while keeping the blessings themselves. We see this with the Shema. There are 2 paragraphs and blessings before. There's a paragraph and blessing after. We see this with the Amidah. There's a whole paragraph and then a blessing, and then a paragraph and a blessing. In many cases, we've eliminated some or all of those paragraphs, keeping the structure, keeping the bones, as it were, and getting rid of some of the fat, if you'll permit me to use that word. So that's another thing that we've done. Also, during the course of the time that we've been running Shabbat services here and live streaming them, we don't take out the Torah. We don't, for health reasons, we don't march around with the Torah, even if we had congregants. So cutting out the Torah procession and recessional cuts out a lot of time. We've decided it's not healthy to bring people up to the bima one after the other, even for the ark openings. So we've eliminated that, and all the honors have basically been eliminated. And imagine, if we do 5 aliyahs on Rosh Hashannah, or 6 on Yom Kippur, or 7 on Shabbat, having a person come, calling them. They're coming up, they're finding the place, they're saying the blessing. Then we pause to read the portion. Then the person has to kiss the Torah again, say the blessing again. And then we call up the next person. By cutting out all the honors and all the coming back and forth, that cuts out a number of time, a big chunk of time as well. So one of the things that we have done is, by eliminating all those things, we've been able to cut a couple of hours out of the service. We're not happy about it, but again, we're being pulled in different directions. Tradition says, yeah, I want to do the whole thing, certainly on these 3 days of the year. On the other hand, people are at home and are lost, and are not with the community. We've got to be realistic. Right? So no matter which way we go, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. And you'll forgive us, but that's what we've tried to do. So let me move from those statements about how to create sacred time and place in your home. Let me move to the issue of the actual service itself. Most people probably aren't aware. They said, well, there's a service. There's a beginning and there's a middle and there's an end. And I don't really know what's going on, between this part and that part. But the truth of the matter is there is a real structure to every service, whether it's a 10-minute minyan, or whether it's a 2-hour Shabbos service, or whether it's a 5-hour Rosh Hashannah service. And by knowing what the structure is, it really helps you. It's a roadmap. And you know where you are, you know where you're headed to. And so let me share that. And I want to focus for now just on the Rosh Hashanah service. So let's call part A, in any service, any morning service, Birkot HaShachar. We start with the blessings of the morning, and there are 14 blessings. It's almost like we get up and we say, thank you for this, 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 and this. There are 14 things, and it sort of is not only, thank you, God, for giving me another day, but it's a reminder to me of the things that I need to be thankful for, grateful for, appreciative of. And that's what we start with Birkot HaShachar. In a traditional service, we also study a little bit of Torah. We've decided to put that aside because we're desperate to keep things as trim and lean as we possibly can. So we'll start with Birkot HaShachar. That's part A of a morning service. We then move into part B. Part B is called Psuke de Zimra, literally verses of song. And on a traditional Shabbos or Yontif service, there's actually 15 poems that we recite. And the idea is, just like an athlete can't just show up at the ballpark, dress and play. You need to warm up. You need to stretch. You need to get yourselves physically and mentally ready. So too in prayer. You can't just walk in the door, sit down, open up, and I'm ready to go with praying. We need to prepare ourselves spiritually. And one of the ways that Jews did that spiritually was by reciting this section, 15 poems, many of them from the Psalms, many of them written by King David, which sort of get us into his head, get us into the mode of, I'm standing before God, and there are things that I need to hear from God, things I need to say to God. What we've done is, here's one of the other problems. In some synagogues, people go, if you're reading 15 poems, imagine reading 15 Shakespeare sonnets. You can't read them fast. You can say the words fast, but you can't comprehend what you're doing. Here's another of the times that we're torn. On the one hand, tradition says say these prayers. But if we say these 15 psalms in Hebrew at such a speed that people are going to taste them, savor them, understand them, think about them, we'll be here all day. And that's not going to work. So what do? We came up with a compromise which stinks. And the compromise is we're going to say all the prayers, we're going to say them as fast as possible. I don't like it, but on the other hand, what are we going to do? Well, in these last 6 months, we've come up with a different approach. Instead of mumbling 15 psalms and poems very quickly, we've concentrated on one each week, a different one. And in fact, as of late, it's even less than one. It's a line or two out of one of these poems. And hopefully less is more, or sometimes it can be. So that's another thing that we've done. By the way, there are people who don't like that we do this, either breakneck speed or only doing a couple of lines of one psalm. Nobody says you have to follow us. Part of what happens at a service goes on up here, top down. But part of it is from there up to God, that you don't need to necessarily be with us word for word. You can say, I'm going to be on my own. When I go to my son's synagogue in Jerusalem, it's an ultra-Orthodox synagogue, and services start 7:30 on a Saturday morning, and everybody knows that at 8:15 the cantor comes up for Shochenad. And from 7:30 to 8:15, everybody's on their own. Some people go fast, some people go slow, but they're all on their own. And then at 8:15, magically, they don't have a cantor, but whoever is the Shliach Tzibur leads steps up, and from that point, everybody's with him. And he goes at the speed. But the first part, people are on their own. And that's perfectly fine. And people ought to do that if they're more comfortable. So that's part B. Then we come to part C. Part C of the morning service is literally called Shachari, which means dawn or morning. And Shachari is made up of two major sections. C number 1 is the Shema, and C number 2 is the Amida. Shema and Amida. Shema is basically our reading passages from the Torah, which are declarations of what it is we believe. When we come to the Amida, we're basically pouring out our heart to God. So 1 is a declaration of beliefs, and number 2 is telling God, first praising God, number 2 petitioning God, number 3 thanking God. The Shema, as I mentioned before, is surrounded by 2 blessings. The first one praises God as the creator of light, physical light. We wake up, the sun's up. We praise God for a new world, a new day. The second one speaks about spiritual light, about the Torah. God gave us the Torah. Then we do the Shema, and then following the Shema, we have the third paragraph and blessing, which is about redemption. The 3 main themes of Jewish theology are creation, revelation, redemption. God created the world. He made the sun. God revealed his will to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai by giving us the Torah. And then the third theme of Judaism is redemption, that we believe God will ultimately redeem the Jewish people. So that's the Amida. On a Shabbat Amida, there are 7 sections, 3 of praise, 1 speaking about Shabbat, and 3 basically of thanks. On Rosh Hashannah, the middle section, no longer speaking mainly about Shabbat, now speaking about Yom HaZikaron, which is what the liturgy, what the Siddur, the Matzah, calls Rosh Hashanah. They don't call it head of the year, Rosh Hashannah. Either it's Yom Teruah, the day of the blowing of the shofar, or it's known as Yom HaZikaron. Yom HaZikaron could be, translation, Memorial Day. Okay, that's sort of a downer, because Memorial Day is more about the dead. Or it could be Remembering Day, in which case it's God remembers our deeds, and we, I think this is more important, we remember our year, who we were, what we did, what we are not so pleased with, remembering what we were taught, who we would like to be. That's what Yom HaZikaron really is all about. Okay, so we've got, that's part C, Shachari. Now we come to part D, which is the Torah reading. On a Shabbat, on a Yantif, reading of the Torah is always a critical part of the service. And on Shabbat, there's generally 1 Torah brought out. On Yantif, there's always 2 Torahs that are brought out. So, first day of Rosh Hashannah, the Torah reading is Genesis chapter 21. And it speaks about the birth of Isaac. So why'd they pick that of all the things they could have picked? Well, first of all, it's about birth, and Rosh Hashannah, according to tradition, is the birth of the world. So we read about not Genesis, not Bereshit, we're going to read that on Simchas Torah, but about the birth of a child, about new beginnings. So it fits there. But even more importantly, remember, Sarah was an older woman and she was barren. And she prayed to God, and God answered her, and almost miraculously, this woman was able to give birth. And so maybe there's a message that the things that are on our hearts that we need to pray to God for, don't think it's impossible. Here's the story of Sarah. Look what happened with her. Okay? So that message is very, very critical. And that's what we read the first day, the birth of Isaac. The second day, we read the next chapter in Genesis, which is chapter 22. And that, we're suddenly shook, because this is that baby that we just read about yesterday. Now God, who just gave that woman that baby, now says to the father, go take him up on a mountain and sacrifice him. And we are stunned. We don't understand God. We don't understand the things that happen in life. And we wonder, was Abraham being pious for following God? Or was he being a fool for picking God over his son? And why would God ask such a thing? And then why did God change his mind? Was it a test? A test for who? For God to figure out how much the student knows or how good he is? Is that what it's about? Or was it a test for Abraham, right? Or a lesson? Every year we struggle with these stories and with what they mean. So that's the first Torah on the first day and on the second day. On both days, we read a second Torah. On Yom Tov, the second Torah is always back in the days of the temple, when there were sacrifices. These were the sacrifices brought on this particular holiday. So we do that on Passover, we do that on Rosh Hashannah, Yom Kippur, etc. That custom may have developed not too long after the year 70, when the temple was just destroyed and people said, how can we have a holiday when we don't bring sacrifices? So the answer back in the year 100 was, well, if we can't bring the sacrifice because there's no temple, why don't we at least read about the sacrifice? So that made sense, because people felt, who knows, any day we may rebuild the temple and we'll, reinstitute the sacrifices. Here we are 2,000 years later, and we're still reading that passage. To some people, it's a disconnect. To some people, it's a reminder of what we're looking forward to. To some people, it's simply a remembrance of where we came from, what we used to do. Okay, so that's the two Torahs for Rosh Hashanah. We always read on Shabbat and on Yom Tov a Haftarah from the middle section of the Bible, the prophets, and it's always in some way related to the theme of the Torah reading. So the story of Sarah was infertile. She prayed for a child and had a miraculous birth. We see almost a parallel story to that from the book of Samuel and the story of Hannah, who was also infertile, also prayed, also given a miraculous child. This is the child who turned out to be Samuel the prophet. And so we see this incredible parallel and reinforcing the message once again that don't be afraid to ask for the impossible. Sometimes you get it. So that's the first thing to remember. Then on the second day, where we had the child comes within this close of having the knife plunged in his throat. The Haftarah for the second day is about the Jewish people after their destruction of the temple and their exile. And Jeremiah pictures, in this case, pictures Mother Rachel, who is crying for her children. When the Jewish people were marched out of Israel into exile in Babylonia, legend has it they passed the tomb of Mother Rachel, which is in Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem. And the idea was the people felt, look, there is the grave of our mother who is crying for us. And God in the Haftarah says to Rachel, dry your tears, don't cry, I'm going to bring these people back. Just like Isaac was saved at the last second, the message of Jeremiah was the Jewish people will be saved. God, it's not over. God still loves us. God will bring us back. So after the Haftarah and the Torah, then we had prayers for the sick, Misha Berach. We had prayers for our country. We had prayers for Israel. Then as sort of a kind of a transition, we do Ashrei, Psalm 145. And under normal circumstances, we'd have the procession again, put the Torahs back, and we now come to the next part of services. So we really come now to part, to the end, which would be Musaf. Okay, so A is the blessings of the morning, B is the Psalms, C is Shachari, D is the Torah reading, and now E is Musaf. Originally, Musaf was an additional sacrifice brought on the holiday. When the temple was destroyed, we added an additional Amidah instead of the additional sacrifice. So we're part E, we have the Musaf. And this is really the heart and the core of the themes of Rosh Hashannah. First of all, it begins with a famous prayer called Hineni, which means, here I am. And it was a prayer of humility by a cantor in the Middle Ages who said, everybody's depending on me. They're counting on me. I don't think I'm up for the job. I have to move them. I have to lead them. I have to break their hearts. I have to get them in the proper mood. I don't know whether I can do this. Help me. And, the cantor also was saying, you're probably going to say, this is the guy you picked of everybody? This is the best you could come up with? Right? I don't feel adequate. So Hineni was basically the cantor apologizing and saying, I know I'm not up to it, but I got all these people who are depending on me. Help me, God, to get through this. Now, as much as Hineni was written and was meant as a prayer of humility, cantors throughout the ages have basically seen this as, you know what? This is my Ridi Pagliacci moment, right? This is the highlight of the year. And so we find that it's been turned into the very opposite. Instead of somebody coming and saying, I'm not worthy, we have a whole theatrical thing, and cantors walk from the back to the front and sort of showing off, and here I am, and aren't I wonderful? And again, it's interesting to see how something meant one way has become something totally different. And it's important sometimes to remember what it's really about and to get back to that. Don't mean to pick on just cantors. Believe me, we rabbis are guilty of many, many things. Probably most of all of talking too much. So I'm going to try to rein that in a little bit. Hopefully, among the things that are abbreviated are some of the hot air that the rabbi, is blowing off. So we come to the Musaf Amida, and the most important prayer of the whole High Holy Days is a prayer called Unatanet Tokef. And that may not ring a bell, but halfway into the prayer, we come to what everybody knows. On Rosh Hashannah, it is decreed. On Yom Kippur, it is sealed. Who shall live and who shall die? Who by water, who by fire. That's part of Unatana Tokef. I remember we had a congregant, this is going back 30 years ago, who told me she wouldn't come to services because those words were so disturbing to her, so scary, so petrifying. She couldn't deal with it, and she stayed away. And I get it. Some people would they would say, but that's the point. You should realize that your life is on the line, and that you better be serious, and you better be truly repentant, because if you're not, this is the alternative. Other people say some people say it's real. This is really what happens. Up in heaven, God opens the book, writes down, decides this one's going to die this year. This one, I'm giving them another year. People believe that. But there are other people who see this not literally, but metaphorically, right? And the idea is that the book, God's not writing in a book, we're writing our own book. In other words, we're the captains of our, destiny. We're the ones who have chosen the kind of lives that we're going to live, or by the actions that we take, whether maybe we're going to bring death upon ourselves. So this is all meant not literally. It's meant metaphorically, and yes, it's meant to focus the mind. Where the end of Unatana Tokef is three things: Teshuvah, Tefillah, Tzedakah. These are the three things that can save you. And Tefillah, of course, is prayer. Begging, please God, don't kill me. Give me another year. Teshuvah, repentance. Please God, I've sinned, I'm sorry. I'll do better. And tzedakah. And more than just my pledge, I'm going to give a donation. I'm going to give charity. And that's going to get, one more mitzvah in my book that'll tip the scale in my favor. I prefer to look at tefillah, teshuvah, tzedakah in a different way. I prefer to think of tefillah, prayer, as not begging, but as deep thinking. You're here for 5 hours or at home for 3 hours. One of the things you should be doing is deep thinking. Who am I? What's been going on since last September? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? What do I need to do to make myself a better person? What habits do I have that I need to get rid of? What habits do I need to add to make me a better person? Tefillah is not just between me and him. Tefillah is between me and me. Number 2 is the idea of teshuvah, repentance. I don't like the word. I think it's a Christian word with all the things, religious things it brings. Teshuvah comes from the Hebrew word shuv, which means turn around. How do I turn myself around? How do I turn around my life? If I feel I'm going in a direction and I don't want to go there, how do I stop? How do I turn around? How do I find a different way to go? And finally, tzedakah is not just your Kol Nidre pledge, although that's critical to keeping open our temple, and it's a wonderful mitzvah. But tzedakah, from the word tzedek, meaning right, righteousness. It's deciding it's about more than just rituals. I got to do kindness. I got to do the right thing at work, at home, with friends, with my kids, right? I got to do right. Then we come to the three main themes of the Musaf Amidah, and they are Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot. Malchuyot from the word Melech. It's all about proclaiming God as king. And Malchuyot has actually 10 verses, quoting from the Bible, 10 verses that speak about God as king. And it's a reminder to us that on Rosh Hashannah in antiquity, the king, the secular king, this was sort of like the coronation day. And each year, on the anniversary of the coronation, we came back and we pledged our allegiance to the king once again. Jews took that idea and connected it between the Jews and God. And so we're basically coming back to proclaim that God is our king. That doesn't really work as a metaphor for us today, but what I do think Malchuyot needs to be for us is, what do I believe about God? What is my relationship with God? What does God do? What kind of God do I believe in? Is God a judge? Is God kind? Is he a parent? We say Avinu Malkeinu when we talk about God. Avinu is a parent. Malkeinu is our king. Those are two very different images. And yet the prayer combines them both. God is, yes, our Avinu. We're intimate. We're close. We can hug him. He kisses us. God is Malkeinu. You don't want to mess with him. He can order off with your head in a moment. And yet, Avinu Malkeinu, it's one phrase, right? So part of what we need to do is to think about God. Who is God? What does God want from me? What do I want from God? Number 2, Zichronot, from the word Zecher or Yizker, which means to remember. And here the idea is that God remembers. And once again, there are 10 verses quoted from the Bible, which all talk about, and God remembered this, and God remembered that. Part of what we want, it works in two different directions. God remembers our deeds. We remind ourselves. We may have forgotten some of the bad stuff that we did. God doesn't forget. He remembers, and we better remind ourselves, and we better deal with it. But on the other hand, God also remembers his love for us and his covenant and his promise to us. So God is sort of torn in these two directions. I need to be a judge, but I need to be the parent. What am I going to do here? Which one is going to outweigh the other? And so we remind ourselves that, yes, we're going to be judged, but we got an in here because God has a relationship with our people. And he loves us. And then finally, the third part of the Amidah and Musaf is called Shofarot, from the word shofar. And it talks about 10 different times that the shofar was blown in the Bible and in history. And it speaks about, it speaks about two things. At Mount Sinai, when we were given the commandments and the Torah, there was the sound of a shofar that was heard. But it also speaks about, and on that day in the future, a great shofar will be blown to herald our freedom. And those who were lost in exile will be brought back to their homeland. So the two sides of the shofar are reminding us of the Torah and that this is our obligation to obey it. And on the other hand, it's a reminder that as dark as things can be for the Jewish people, we always believe that there will be ultimate redemption and that God will, the shofar will be blown, the Messiah will come if you believe, in that, and that the Jewish people will be saved and be, returned to their homeland. And also, I have to say that it comes at the end of the service. The blowing of the shofar is a call to action. It's a bugle charge. It's a way of saying to us, don't just sit around and say these words. I'm blowing the shofar, charge. Go ahead, do the things that you claim you believe in. Do the things that you know you should be doing. So that's the shofar. And that pretty much brings to a close the Musaf Amida. Then we have the concluding prayers. Ein Keloheinu, Aleinu, the Mourner's Kaddish, and Adon Olam, just as we would on every single Shabbat. So that's sort of a summary of what's happening and what the themes are and what we're trying to think about and to deal with. One last thing that I want to share with you, and I've shared this many, many times before. The essence of being in shul on Rosh Hashannah and Yom Kippur is we need to do a cheshbon hanefesh. Cheshbon means an accounting. Nefesh means of the soul. Right? One of the things that we do, it's not just, God, you know what we did, please judge us favorably. What it really is, it's us judging ourselves. It's us making an accounting of who we are, how much we've missed on being the kind of people that we want to be. And so here's my suggestion. I want you to make a little card, because it's better if it's written than if it's in your head. If it's in your head, you might not remember. Make a little card and think about all of your relationships, okay? Think about as a child, if your parents are still alive, as spouse. Think about as parent. Think about as sibling. Think about as friend. Think about as either employer or employee, right? And just write down those key words that ultimately speak about your, the nexus of your relationships. And every so often, when you get bored, which is going to happen a lot during the 3-hour service, take out this card and just open it and look at those words: child, spouse, parent, right? Look at them and think for a moment, focus. Maybe it doesn't have to be all at one time. At each break, every so often, look at one and think about what kind of child have I been to my elderly parents? Have I been there enough for them? As a spouse, am I there? What could I be doing more for my husband, for my wife, for my partner, for my children? In what way have I disappointed them? What way am I a disappointment to myself as a parent? So those are, and if you take out this little card and look at those words and, to yourself, you think about this and you make an accounting of your soul, of who you've been. And hopefully, by the end of the day, by the end of the holidays, you've understood, I remember now what where I've fallen short, and I know now what my new goals have been. So that's something that I would urge you all to do. So that's really the story. And for those of you who will be here with us, thank you for keeping us company. We appreciate it. For those of you who will be at home, which is most of you, I certainly understand where you're coming from. And you don't have to feel guilty at all about it. Certainly not in the world that we live in today. What I'm telling you is that we're going to do the best we can, we from here, you from there, to try to make this a day that is of ultimate importance. It's not just about the apple and the honey or about the brisket that we eat later. What goes on either at home or here is of ultimate importance. I wish you all a Shana Tova Umtuka, healthy year, sweet year, a good year.